the Seven Mountains Mandate and Charlie and Turning Point have said at times, right, we don't think individuals are evil. We think our isms and ideologies that are controlling them are evil. But at the same time, you're collectively putting all these people in one basket, if you want to call it that, and saying we need to do something about this basket. The deep state government, for example, right? Everybody that works in the government, therefore, is deep state. There's no way out of not being that. And they're forcing you to choose sides, and that's what a culture war does.
Thank you for entering the Gray Zone. I'm Robbie, your host as always, and very excited about a really important interview, it feels like, at least very culturally relevant right now. We're going to be speaking with Dr. Matthew Boedy. He is a professor of rhetoric and composition at the University of North Georgia and the Georgia AAUP president. He is the author of this book, which we will be discussing, The Seven Mountains Mandate, Exposing the Dangerous Plan to Christianize America and Destroy Democracy. Dr. Matthew Boedy is very much an expert on Turning Point USA, as well as Charlie Kirk, and he's acquainted with him in an interesting way. We talk about Christian nationalism, we talk about Turning Point, we talk about the Seven Mountains Mandate, and all of these things that are mixing together in cultural wars today, and how we try to get a handle on it, just to tease it out, add more nuance, rather than assuming what definitions mean. We slow down here, and we just wanted to make sure we sort of tease out what exactly are these words when we throw them around. What is Turning Point, and where did it start, and what was its original intention versus where it's come to be now, as well as the same about Charlie Kirk. How did he start, and what was his journey towards where he came? Of course, want to just take a moment to obviously acknowledge Charlie Kirk's assassination was a very big tragedy. It was evil and it was wrong. And no matter what you believe, you shouldn't be assassinated for your beliefs. He held the image of God. He was made in God's image. And whether you liked him or did not, agreed with him or did not, we just acknowledge that tragedy and the loss that it must mean for his family and his friends. Here's my interview with Dr. Matthew Boedy. Well, g'day, welcome. Thank you again for entering the Gray Zone for what is going to be, well, we have a lot of serious discussions, but I think this one may just have a bit more of a serious tone and a somber tone, but we'll try not to be necessarily doom and gloom. I want to welcome Dr. Matthew Boedy to the podcast today. Welcome, sir.
Happy to be here.
Today, we are discussing something that is in the news and has affected the whole world. We're going to be talking a little bit about Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, and in particular, the details that Dr. Boedy is a particular expert on, which is the Seven Mountain Mandate, which is the title of his book. The subtitle is Exposing the Dangerous Plan to Christianize America and Destroy Democracy. Now, book titles are always a little provocative, as they need to be, and I don't think that you're doing that just out of a hope to sell books, though I know it's a collaboration to make titles with your publisher.
Right, no.
But this is strong language, and we want to take our time slowly to actually respect this topic of Christian nationalism and what the Seven Mountain Mandate is. So we're going to suss that out slowly for everyone who's listening. Before we move forward, I think it's good for us to make sure that the posture is clear regarding Charlie Kirk, that it was obviously awful that this man was killed. Whatever his political ideas were, we shouldn't be killed for ideas, assassinated for ideas. And we pray for all those affected. I know it has affected many, many people, but especially those who knew him and loved him the closest. It's a terrible thing. We condemn that, and we're not here to make light of that. That said, we can still talk about his ideas where we do and do not agree with him, and look at maybe some of the momentum that has come from his movement in Turning Point and the work that he and the teams did, and what you, Dr. Boedy, are highlighting as some things that we need to be very careful of that are dangerous. There's a lot there. I'm setting us up. So to begin, I think we should just talk about Christian nationalism. If you would talk a little bit about the definition of nationalism versus the definition of Christian nationalism, if we can make sure we're clear on what the differences are, if there are any, so that we agree on those terms before we even dive into a long conversation on it.
There's been some distinction, I think, especially by conservative Christians, between patriotism and nationalism. And patriotism being you love your country, you want to be here, you want other people to be here, you think it's really great. Nationalism is particularly obviously not just an American phenomenon where you add all the things about patriotism, but you add a ranking system where your country is better than the rest, and also perhaps God made it that way. And I think particularly now when we see things about border policy that nations have a history where they're supposed to protect their own and not be involved in global issues. America first. Christian nationalism, of course, is the basic idea to make America a Christian nation. And I want to particularly point out that for people who might fall into that category, they don't like that label, that term. They don't use it for themselves. Christian nationalism is an academic label made up by academics who describe this group of people. But there's been surveys and polls over the last few years, really since Trump's come onto the scene, about what elements of Christian nationalism should be included in that, and then what percentage of people would go along with those different elements. Some of the big ones are, do you believe America is a Christian nation? Do you believe it was founded as a Christian nation? And do you believe it should be one in the future because it's lost that? There's some specific ones about how they would go about that, particularly the role between Christianity and democracy. There's been specific questions about would you support a strong leader, an autocrat who would come in and make it a Christian nation? I think also, I especially with the Seven Mountains Mandate, my definition of Christian nationalism, of course, is Christianizing America. But that is not the idea that you're going out to evangelize people and make the majority of people identify themselves as Christian through evangelism. It is, in fact, an institutional nationalism. That I would say when they want a Christian nation, they mean the cultural institutions, the seven mountains, the seven areas of our culture, to be Christian in a sense that it's recognizable and perhaps led by people that are Christians. But it is a specifically minority movement on purpose. That is, they do talk about evangelism. But they don't necessarily see Christianity or a Christian nation forming because more and more people are identifying a Christian. In fact, they think Christianity should be the minority position, so they want the minority to rule over the majority in these cultural institutions. So my definition of Christian nationalism, of course, is to Christianize America. And because of that minority part, this is why I'm suggesting it's a danger to democracy, which I would include, obviously, majority voting, but also religious pluralism. I believe our nation was not founded as a Christian nation. There are certainly a lot of Christians in its founding, but that the religious pluralism of our founding means that we accept, and the government does not take vested interest in one particular religion. The last part of democracy I would include with this idea of compromise. Obviously, the founding fathers compromised. There was compromise along the way. The Seven Mountains Mandate group is not interested in compromise because they see the other side as evil.
So let's start with the founding myths or the founding, people will disagree. Were we not founded as a Christian country? And in, I guess, the most succinct way that you could spend a long time talking about that, like, how do you defend that posture that you say we're not? Because obviously you'd have people pushing back, say, yes, we are, and here's my reasons and my documents, etc.
Yeah. I think some of the myths being purported, and one of them Charlie Kirk does repeat, he got it from David Barton, right, that the original signers of the Declaration of Independence, I think he said 55 out of 56, were Bible-believing Christians. But that really eclipses the wide variety of Christianity in the colonies, but also the wide variety of other religions in the colonies. And so when I say not founded as a Christian nation, I mean that the people who came together to found our nation, both the people that signed the Declaration of Independence and the people that made the Constitution, and all the people that were living in it who rebelled against England, did not do it in some manners to form a Christian nation. They did it to form a nation. Now, some of our constitutions has the word God in it, certainly. But again, it's a wide variety of what is meant by that. Within Protestant itself, right? If you think about the two main groups that we think of that landed here before, they realized other people were here, right? The Puritans in Massachusetts and the people in Virginia, we've always heard that the Puritans, yes, were on a religious mission, a city on a hill, but the people in Virginia were not on a religious mission. They were on a business mission. So just that itself tells me that there was quite a wide variety of reasons people came to the new land. And some of them were religious in nature. But at the same time, you think about founding a nation, I don't think we were founded as a Christian nation, maybe because of the First Amendment and also because of the idea that the Constitution that we have is not necessarily a religious document, it's a political document.
Yeah, I agree. And even the idea of just trying to set this country up at the beginning in a way that protected what we call the inalienable rights. You could see the founding fathers and the writers addressing that power that cannot be questioned as God, right? These are given by a being who cannot be questioned, so that we can't take these away. And they're also clarifying that the state is not the one giving these rights to the people. They have them by nature of being human beings. And so but that's really key to this nationalism, this Christian nationalist idea is where essentially the people are trying to take back what was stolen or revert back to what was changed, right? That we started this way. All these changes, all these politics, all these radical whatever have taken what we wanted our country to be, and we're taking it back. So it immediately creates this, victim and enemy within the framework, doesn't it? Part of what you touched on a little bit earlier, you talked about the difference between having a minority and a majority. In looking at kind of understanding the seven mountains, I've seen what and you can tease this out and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there's sort of a formula of, if we wanted to Christianize the nation or evangelize it in a traditional, like the hope of most gospel believing Christians is hopefully people will come to choose the gospel as we present it in every possible way we can, and they'll come to know it and choose it by free will. So it's more Christians in the country means more influence for Christians in the country, which means more gospel. And that's a good, pure-hearted idea. But the mountain mandate seems to want more power so that we can coerce more Christianity.
Yeah.
So rather than let's increase the amount of Christians and more Christians will be in more places of influence, this is let's get a few people in power to control the things that influence the most people. Am I kind of around the right idea?
No, I think then that's what divides the line between the first category of being a healthy relationship with democracy, that is evangelizing the majority of people, blah, blah, blah. And the second one not being. One of the lines from the Seven Mountains mandate from people who say they advocate for that is they see Reformation coming before revival. Reformation being not just the reforming of the church like Martin Luther, but reforming the cultural institutions. And that would bring people to Christ or give them a sense that the gospel is more important than whatever. But evangelism being an individual decision, you go and talk to people, or maybe it's mass talking, but it's still an individual decision. They see the cultural institutions being changed as a collective decision, as a institutional decision. So one is based upon the idea of converting people, persuading people, much like democracy. One is not based upon that idea. And this is why those people in that group push toward anti-democratic means. They may use democratic means to gain power, but once they're there, they enforce the minority position upon the minority. It used to be that because of the First Amendment, religious minorities were protected from the power of the government. And there's obviously debates on whether or not that is actually true. But now the minority says we want the power of the government not to protect us, but to enforce our view on other people. So you can see where this could go. So the Seven Mountains include the mountain of government, electing people, but the other wider 6 cultural institutions don't necessarily rely upon electing people. And so they rely upon a much more anti-democratic, we'll say, cultural enforcement of a code that they would try to obviously live out.
And so we're getting into it. So what is this Seven Mountains, and where did it start? So I'll do you the favor of reading them, so you don't have to think off or count.
I always leave one off the list.
Yeah. It'd be easy to, especially after, I'm sure you talked about it a million times. So these are the mountains of influence. And this is a mandate that I'm doing a poor job of what you're going to do a better job in a minute. Mandate that this group of people believe is our job to get in control of these institutions in order to coerce, enact God's will, what have you, over basically a whole nation. So they are family, education, religion, government, the media, arts and entertainment, and business. I counted 7 here. Okay. Where did this start? Who did someone sit down and pen a manifesto? Was this sort of a slow process? Where did it go?
I wouldn't call it a manifesto, but it's certainly a penned in a list. The origin story dates back to 1975 when 2 founders of college campus ministries, Bill Bright, who founded Campus Crusade, and a guy named Lauren Cunningham, who founded Youth with a Mission, who happened to know each other. And they met one day in 75 and said that God had told them these were the areas that they want to send their fellow Christians, their alumni of their group into. And they specifically did use the word influence. And I want to emphasize that they were about influencing the culture. If you think about what Campus Crusade was, it's a college ministry. And where do they go after college? They go into all these cultural institutions. Bill Bright very much was interested in curing the nation's ills, not just on campus. Lauren Cunningham, his global missions organization from the get-go, from 75, put this into practice. When they go into a new country or go into a different culture, they would look at all these cultural institutions and see how we could push the gospel as an influence in these areas. So it became a strategy of evangelism. That changed over the years as the idea of the culture war came in, as the idea of conservative Christians got involved in American politics. It became part of a mandate. And that mandate was formed by a couple of people. One is a guy named Peter Wagner, who was a seminary professor who was interested in church growth. And he was one of the people that pushed this idea. He didn't use the term Christian nationalism, but this idea that we should take back America through the culture. One of his partners, one of his disciples in this movement is a guy named Lance Wallnau, who's still alive. And Lance Wallnau, if I ever say his name correctly, and he has a podcast radio show. He is a friend of Charlie Kirk, and Lance is credited with the metaphor of the mountains because he met Lauren Cunningham in 2000-ish, and Lauren passed along this list. You can see it's slowly been growing over the years, where people go into culture. And the thing that really changed it from influence to a mandate, and Peter and Lance's efforts, are the idea that spiritual warfare should dictate what people do, what Christians do in culture. That is, spiritual warfare is good versus evil. It is not just a spiritual thing, though. They see these anti-Christian forces, these demonic forces, having control over people and therefore having control over these institutions. So one ways in which they try to negate that is take over the institution, take over the cities or the communities that are inherited by this. So it is not just praying for them as you think of spiritual warfare as prayer. It is about casting out demons. It is about bringing spiritual power to bear on elections and making elections versus good versus evil. And so the spiritual warfare built up in charismatic circles in the early 21st century. And then Donald Trump came on the scene and had all those charismatic preachers be his evangelical advisors. And last thing, how did it get to Charlie Kirk? Charlie Kirk was taught this by a guy named Rob McCoy, who was until recently a pastor at a large megachurch, a Calvary Chapel that is kind of charismatic church. He is a Seven Mountains Mandate person, and he learned it from somebody else. And Rob seemingly went out to find someone he could pass this along to. And Charlie, around that time, this is around 2019, obviously Turning Point's very growing, very strong conservative circles, but Charlie specifically does not mix his religion and politics. He says that I make secular arguments to America, and Rob McCoy convinces him that even though he's identified himself as a Christian, he could make this turn into Christian nationalism because there's lots of verses in the Bible that talk about government and culture and things like that. And Charlie takes that to heart and changes his position and starts to turn Turning Point into a Christian nationalism organization. And the last thing I'll say about Charlie and Christian nationalism, and he doesn't use that term to describe him, as I mentioned, many people don't, but he has described himself as a Christian and as a nationalist, so I make him into a Christian nationalist.
There's a million directions to go. With the idea that this gets born into spiritual demonic powers, right?
Mhm.
There is that idea within it that something is controlling behind the curtain these major things that do change and shift our culture, and as a result, change our lives. Um, there's a mixed bag there, and Christians will have different feelings on how true or untrue that is, even if they don't buy into the seven mountain mandate, right? There will be people who are like, there seem to be powers over certain
Yeah.
regions. There seem to be, and the Bible seems to confirm these things, you know. And so it's an easy trap though to go in. I could see the earnestness, I guess. I want to do a good faith reading of some of these people where they're seeing like culture's changed, there's a lot more problems, and it seems like if we had some influence in something really important like education, or we had, you know, more influence in entertainment, we could maybe push some of those bad things out and bring some more godly, you know, Christian ideas in. So there's a good heart initially in there, but I see the problem with the fact that if you see anyone who's an agent of something you deem as demonic, that person then becomes evil, right? Because then we're looking at all of Hollywood as agents of this demonic power,
Mhm.
or we're looking at all of government as agents of this demonic power. And so it's a really easy swing to then suddenly start seeing we're not just trying to push evil, demonic, princes of the air powers out. We're trying to push all the people who have succumbed and submitted to those powers out. And so here we are years later in the culture wars, everyone who thinks different of me is evil,
Yeah.
inhuman, monsters, and what a mess we are because both sides of the aisles are pointing and doing that to each
Yeah.
other.
If you think about the verses, in the New Testament about spiritual warfare, I see them as individual, right? You take up your personal armor of God and your personal breastplate and you fight the devil. They want to see that as institutional. So when you directly say, right, we see these institutions as evil, they're not interested then in going evangelizing individual people. They're saying we have to take all those people out, right?
Right.
And if you think about just the mountain of entertainment, for years, the idea in Christianity was we create our own Christian content, our own Christian movies, our own Christian music, and run it parallel with Hollywood. And we would win in the marketplace if we only made better stuff or we made more persuasive stuff. Now, at some point, the Seven Mountains Mandate people said, we're tired of losing. And so they want to add something to the gospel. That is the individual salvation decision, right? We want to add this cultural idea to it. And that's where we've gotten it today. If you think about the divide in our culture, the partisan divide, where it started and what origins are, but part of it is this: we will not, as a group, as a collective, compromise with the other side because the other side is evil and you don't compromise with evil. I will say, though, there's obviously a spectrum of beliefs in the Seven Mountains Mandate, and Charlie and Turning Point have said at times, right, we don't think individuals are evil. We think are isms and ideologies that are controlling them are evil. But at the same time, you're collectively putting all these people in one basket, if you want to call it that, and saying we need to do something about this basket. The deep state government, for example, right? Everybody that works in the government, therefore, is deep state. There's no way out of not being that. And they're forcing you to choose sides, and that's what a culture war does. In many ways, throughout the decades, conservative Christian political organizations have made politics a religious sport. So you have to decide which side you're on. Are you on God's side or you're not on God's side? And that has only risen, by Charlie and Turning Point through the years that they've been successful.
So Charlie, you said, comes along and he was just doing kind of college debates, making sort of an apologist, what have you, which is good work, I had not heard of the guy probably 3 months before his assassination.
Right. Okay.
I'm 38, so I'm probably not in his primary algorithm. I heard about him because he came through our city. There were protests, so I was like, oh, who's being protested? That's probably relevant.
Okay.
Because it's a liberal city, but he came to kind of what is the MAGA church in our city. Yep. And so they hosted an event with Charlie Kirk. And I was like, oh, who's him? Never heard of him. Looked him up. Didn't like most of what I saw, but I was like, okay, well, he's out there.
Okay.
And then this happened.
Yeah.
Which again, tragedy, wrong in every right. And I mean, the world kind of stopped and looked at this, not just America, but like
Right.
the
No,
world.
yeah.
I've got friends in Australia who were like, this is the worst thing ever. We loved him and we watched. I was like,
One of my first
did I
interviews
miss out on something?
was, yeah. Yeah.
However, you knew about him a lot earlier, given just the nature of your work and stuff, as well as being placed on a special list that Charlie had, Turning Point at least had early on. Do you
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about, I guess, how that went? What was that like for you being placed on a watch list as professors, but also you have a timeline here of this man's sort of rise to prominence, and maybe if by teasing some of that out and seeing the shifts and turns, we can understand him a little better and his impact.
Sure. So in 2016, when I think very few people knew what Turning Point was, they went viral, one of their first viral moments with this list of professors called their Professor Watch List. And this was right after the election, so they were trying to coattails on Trump winning, and they made this list, probably about of 100 professors. And what they did was they collected a bunch of news articles and opinion pieces and social media comments they didn't like and said, we don't like this person because they said this. I got put on the list for writing an opinion piece advocating against allowing concealed guns on campuses, which is a law now in my state of Georgia. And our state of Georgia was debating this as a bill in the legislators at that time. And they put my picture, they put my contact information, they put a link to my opinion. Of course, then the list itself is a collection of people who they say are indoctrinating students on campus. And all they had from me was an opinion piece that I had published several months prior. So this list really gets them on the map. And they're not the first group to make lists of professors, and they're not the first group to attack higher education. But what they did with that was build upon that to suggest, of course, that colleges are indoctrination centers, that you should defund them, you should not give money to them, that both professors and the student body are inherently liberal and they can't be changed, and on down the line in terms of arguments you've heard about that. So they started out as an anti-higher education group, as obviously a Second Amendment gun rights group. But specifically a couple years before that, when Charlie was building Turning Point, one of his first issues was getting rid of the national debt. He also, one of the first things they started was a tagline called Big Government Sucks. So they're obviously very conservative, but these are all kind of secular issues. That is, they don't have a particular religious component to them. And it took well into the first Trump administration, and Charlie was a Trump supporter as he became president, and Trump has appeared at Turning Point events 20, 30 times since then. I think that what interested Charlie into Rob McCoy's pitch about turning to Christian nationalism, he was probably convinced by the religious argument of these verses and you could do this, but I also think it was a tremendous business opportunity. And I mean that in a positive way, is that, Turning Point was growing, but it was still limited to the college student organizing that they were doing. And this allowed Turning Point to expand into all the other areas that are on the list. So Rob McCoy, I think, presented it as this is a Turning Point expansion tour. And that happened to play out because they met in late 2019. They started appearing together in early 2020, and then the pandemic hit. Well, what happened? College campuses were closed for a year. Where did Charlie go? He went to churches. And he spoke to churches that Rob McCoy opened a door for him. He spoke to churches every Sunday for a year, churches that were open, that had meetings, obviously, during the pandemic. And then he became, during the Biden administration, right, an anti-regime person who thought that all that Biden was doing during the presidency about the pandemic and about the vaccine and all that, was wrong. I think that Turning Point then hired staff all across. There's an arm of Turning Point for each of the 7 mountains, which is what I lay out in the book. They expanded their operations and got and sent donors hey, this is where we want to go, and they got much more money to do so. And I think that Charlie, went from a college debater, and he was the first person to do that, but very good at it, and went from that to a culture warrior that is fighting the culture war, not just answering people's questions about different issues. And he was obviously very educated and he can answer a lot of questions. And they often use video clips of him doing that. And I think what moved him, not just was Rob McCoy, but over time after the pandemic and through the pandemic, was seeing the way in which they figured out what to do with Turning Point alumni. And that for a while was their term of people who went to their college group, and now they have more high school groups than they have college groups. What do we do with those people once they leave us? Well, they're going to go into churches, a lot of them. So they started Turning Point Faith. They're going to go in education and be teachers. So they started Turning Point Academy. All their alumni that they want to keep track of are now part of this cultural war that they're doing in the Seven Mountains. And you can see it just creates a cycle where you bring new people in, you train them, and they're very good at training. They have these events. You knock on doors, you start Turning Point Action, you get them invested in it. And then when they graduate, they can stay in the business. They can stay in the organization. So Turning Point's become the indispensable organization, not just for the Seven Mountains, but for the conservative cause, for the Republican Party. It's taken over the GOP in many senses of its operations. And of course, it is blessed in every way possible by the Trump administration.
Wow, you're painting even a larger picture than even I understood. Like, so they're now deep into like high schools and trying to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the numbers of it. I mean, they up to. I want to get. They say they have 2,500 chapters, and that's more high school than college, but they have presences on 3,500 campuses, both high school and college. There is a lot of young people involved.
The subtitle of your book, you say this is a dangerous plan, and you're laying out for us this a lot of this was not just luck and going viral and catching the algorithm at the right time. There was a lot of intention for many years of leaders pushing this idea of we need control of these seven mountains, these major places of influence, finding key players, and lightning struck with Charlie Kirk, Trump administration, and that plan continues to unfold. So there is not to sound conspiratorial, but there's a lot of intention.
There are a lot of people working together on this. Yes.
Yeah, they're doing this, very much on purpose. Why is this? Before I ask a larger question of why is this so dangerous to democracy? Why is this in some ways? And you can disagree with me if you want. To me, it seems anti-Christian in the sense that if we call ourselves a Christian as a follower of the teachings of Jesus, even if we want to reduce that down to a red letter Christian, right, as they sometimes call themselves, the one who tells us to serve, take the low place at the table, to have individual conversations, who comes into history at a time period where the best metaphors he could use were seed planting and harvest and watching over sheep. That sort of, if God is sovereign, that was intentional to bring his voice into that type of period, to give us the scriptures we have to show this is the posture of the way of the kingdom. It's slow and it's one at a time, and it leaves the 99 for the one. So I'm painting a picture of that's what I would say. If you could go grassroots, orthodox, we would all agree, Nicene Creed sort of Christianity of there's a posture we take. That is against this idea maybe that we have this machine that moves all the levers, that leaves people basically no other option but to consign themselves to a Christian nationalism and a Christianity. It just seems like one seeks power and the other seeks service. And I'm pitting these against the maybe unfairly, but it strikes me as I don't see how they can compute. And Christian nationalism seems a paradoxical idea.
I do think if we consider the end times here as a motivator to the power movement, obviously throughout the history of the church, there's some discussion of the end times. And the idea that, at least in America, there was this idea that Christians would be persecuted in the end, and that we would be taken to heaven, and there'd be a battle among the people that are left, and Jesus would win that battle and reign on earth. And that fostered to the Seven Mountains Mandate people a sort of passiveness. Oh, Jesus is going to return soon. There's going to be persecution. We have no need for the power structures in America or the cultural institutions. They're all going to burn, or Jesus is going to reform them when he comes back. We have no need. This is the fundamentalist idea, right, of the 1920s and 30s. Separate yourself from culture, separate yourself from people even
Yes.
are Christian, but also involved in culture. And they're taking the Seven Mountains Mandate people is taking that idea and turning on its head.
Yeah.
Because the end times is not about negative idea or negative plans, or not about persecution, but is about winning, but about victory. One of their slogans in the 80s-ish was "Kingdom Now." That is, the spiritual kingdom coming at the end of the world should be in place now. And that has some theological supporters, depending on which view of the end times you have. So they're not making that up out of thin air. But at the same time, then, of course, how do you get to that spiritual kingdom now? You make it into a physical kingdom. And I think that if you think about some of the, old names of conservative Christian politics, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, they were kind of on the fence. They weren't exactly in the same manner as the people we think of today, Trump being one of them, because I think eventually the people who were getting some of what they want, judges and overturning Roe v. Wade and all that, still they were losing the culture and they were tired of losing. And they needed a justification for their spiritual power theology, or an outlet, not a justification, an outlet for that. So yes, you do see this gospel idea: serve people, help the lowly, treat the widow and the orphan, and that is supposed to give the gospel its shine, give the gospel its power. And the other one is Jesus is coming back. He's a king, and we should make him a king now. That's why this phrase "Christ is King" is being repeated throughout not just social media, but in person. So it's two different ideas of the end times, but it's also two different ideas of Jesus. And while I think one side is wrong in twisting scripture, they do point to verses and point to things that say this is how it should be. So you can't dismiss it as it being anti-Christian. It's presented itself as Christian. It's kind of like a further division within Christianity. We've had those for a while. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you dismiss the people in the Seven Mountains Mandate or the MAGA movement largely as non-Christians, then you're really not paying attention to what they're saying, but also you're saying that they don't believe the gospel, when clearly at times they admit that they do.
Yeah, very well said. I think we're hitting on like the problems of eschatology and what they created, and dispensationalism and all those things that come into play. I just had an interview with a lovely guy. He was a Bible teacher I had, and he said eschatology tends to reflect what we value now.
Okay. Yeah.
We take the things that we value now, and that's how we work out our eschatology. So in the past, it was, well, we value being in heaven. We value just all things being restored, and let's get out of here as soon as possible. So it was more passive, as you said, and maybe we have leaned more towards no, we care about this earth, and we're sick of losing, and we're sick of seeing evil things happen, because they're not without full cause. There's a lot of problems in the world, and it would be good if we had some Christian influence in place. So I'm setting up this tension as well. It's like there's always the problem of the civil rights movement. If we bring these categories too far, if we say Christians, you should just sit down and stay in your churches and love the grocery clerk, and you're going to spread the gospel, we don't get the civil rights movement. And at the same time, maybe we swing too far the pendulum and we get the Seven Mountains Mandate. So it's a tension of like, how much is too much? How little is too little? What influence is justifiable? And I think there's no overarching answer or framework for that. But I think we at least are seeing maybe some of the dangers on swinging too far one side or the other.
That does bring up, obviously, the question of race. When you talk to Seven Mountains Mandate people and you tell them what they're doing is anti-democratic or not Christian, they'll go, wait a minute. The civil rights people, they were Christian too. We should be doing what they're doing. And that just sets up the racial divide here. Now, I will say directly, again, Seven Mountains Mandate is a wide spectrum of beliefs, but it does have this list of 7. It's mainly found in charismatic churches, some more, non-denominational people, but also heavily white. It is a Christian culture that they want to impose that is a white Christian culture. And I use that word on purpose because Black Christians have said that directly. I tend to leave racial issues to Black Christians to talk about it much more directly because they have that history.
Yeah.
But what, and we saw this obviously with Charlie's assassination, comparisons between Charlie Kirk and Martin Luther King, even though Charlie Kirk said bad things about Martin Luther King. I think that it is not a one-to-one thing. Oh, they're involved in politics, so should we. But it's how you are that very much matters, and they kind of efface that or erase that. But also, I think in terms of if the idea of the Seven Mountains Mandate is to have this consensus Christian culture, and that consensus between the people within Protestantism, they often leave out Black Christians in that group, and therefore also leave out Catholics, because Seven Mountains Mandate people see Black Christian theology as weak or not strong enough,
Yeah.
or not even Christ-centered in some regards. So they don't necessarily make it racial, but it often ends up being very obviously racial. Now, that said, there are plenty of to be honest with you, the Seven Mountains Mandate is not an American thing. It's a global thing, and it's very strong in Africa.
I was going to ask.
So
Yeah.
it has a prosperity gospel, which has both white and Black roots. So it crosses racial lines, but in some presentations of it, it does not.
I think that's really valuable to say. Yeah, that it is a form of Christian culture that certainly doesn't represent the swath of all Christianity across cultures and time in the world today, and those expressions. You compared, I know there were comparisons, right? Martin Luther King and Charlie Kirk. The best one, for my opinion, that I heard actually was closer to saying Charlie Kirk is this branch of politics. They're George Floyd. It is their reckoning moment of all that is wrong and needs to happen and advance in those causes, right? So George Floyd was this racial reckoning with minorities, with the treatment of, mistreatment, what have you, of police officers, of the people, of, the problems with drugs in minority neighborhoods and poverty. And it was a reckoning moment across the world there. And I heard someone compare it to, Charlie Kirk is this not opposite necessarily, but it's this movement's person to be like, this death means reckoning needs to happen. I found that interesting. I don't know.
Well, that makes the racial divide even more clear. Whatever you think of George Floyd, and he wasn't a minister in the same ways that Charlie Kirk was, or even close to that, right? He was just a guy that was killed by police. That the death itself, the cultural reaction to the deaths, plural, there makes the racial divide clear. And this is why they want that to be made clear, because one culture they do not very much value, and the one they do. And I think also there have been several different comparisons, Martin Luther King being one of them, JFK being another one. The one I thought was most interesting and perhaps has some merit is a one comparing to Jim Elliot, the missionary who was killed by the people he was trying to evangelize. Now, did Charlie only speak about the gospel at these campus events? No, he talked about politics and a wide range of issues, but he certainly at times answered people's questions about Jesus. Was he killed by this kind of anti-Christian force? No. And that's where it kind of falls apart.
He's complicated, like any of us, right? Though while I like to tease out and nuance things and enter the gray zones, that's hence the podcast. There also, there were some very clear things that Charlie said that were truthful, gospel, even compassionate, and I had to go look for those because my algorithm didn't send them to me. Right. I had to go look for those, and I was like, yeah, you know what? There was some really solid stuff here. Clearly, he resonated with millions of people, but you don't have to also look too far to see things that were very clearly un-Jesus, unbiblical, hateful,
not true,
laced with racist, straight up not true. Yeah, he did spread a lot of false truths, conspiracy, and he was an agitator and liked to play that firebrand thing. And so there was some very clear, we're hearing, the black pulpit and the black church really speak to be like, how can we elevate and use the word martyr for a person who it seems had a range of ideas that were obviously, at best not liked, and at worst were condemnable by the Bible. such as the things that were clearly very racist. I'm not afraid to use that word. I guess what I'm trying to tease out is a lot of people have called him a martyr. Why is that right? Is that wrong in your eyes?
I've been saying no for several reasons, and I think the top reason is that his mixture of religion and politics does not make him just a martyr for Christianity. In fact, we don't know why he was killed. We don't have a lot of information on the individual shooter.
Yep.
And I say he's not a martyr because to me, a martyr is someone who's killed by a larger government regime for perhaps representing the gospel, but someone that is more powerful than the person. That is not the case here. If you think about Martin Luther King as a martyr, yes, he was killed by an individual, but he was killed by a racist, system that brought this individual to us. Now, we may learn about this shooter later on, but we don't have a lot of things now. But what martyrdom does is create this justification for saying that these larger, darker forces are what brought his death. Much in the same way, and I think we're repeating that what we saw in Butler, Pennsylvania, when candidate Trump then was almost killed by this person we know little about and we will never learn more about because there's nothing to learn. He was not an ideologue, but that vacuum of information or that non-information allowed them to say they killed or they shot at President Trump and now they killed Charlie Kirk. So to make a martyrdom means to take these larger forces and say they're running our government or they're running our culture and we need to attack them. They're donating to the other political party. That is why I think the two reasons: one, the facts don't fit martyrdom, and two, to call someone a martyr then usually means a retribution tour for those who ally with him.
Right.
And that has already started.
That's very strategic use of the word.
Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. They came up with it. They were the ones that pushed it. It wasn't something that they just latched onto, but specifically a martyr for Christianity, because I think also Charlie and Turning Point were trying to make Turning Point to be an organization that went beyond Trump. It was not merely a Trump ally. They were building a movement to outlast him, to be the indispensable organization for whenever Trump left the scene. And I think to say martyr for Christianity means to portray Charlie in a whole different light. As you mentioned, you didn't know him until 3 months ago. And I think many people, when they saw him, saw his assassination and then saw the memorial service a couple of days later, they were introduced to Turning Point for the first time. And Turning Point wants that introduction to be about their tagline, faith, family, and freedom, not about any connection to a political movement, because they see themselves as a much larger religious movement now. So to call someone a martyr means right and then to divide our country, and then also to set up justification for anything you want to do in his name.
Yeah, and it's easy to justify ourselves when we're afraid or enraged, right? Like Scott Galloway, I've heard him say a few times, he's like, we found out sex doesn't sell as well as rage, so that's where we've gone, right? Like it's easy to sell rage, it's easy to sell fear, and like you said, it's a tour of retribution. In returning to your book, these 7 mountains, and they're obviously very influential. What happens if they succeed? Like, why is this so dangerous?
So I'm suggesting that the thing's been around, the mandate's been around for 50 years, but Turning Point's brought it to as close to success as it's ever been, because Turning Point has a lot of money and a lot of people and a lot of support in different areas of the culture. So what does victory look like to them? I mean, they say it is a Christian consensus culture. But the question I think I keep asking myself is, throughout the history of the culture war, is this a war meant to be won or just meant to be fought all the time? And I think it whatever you define as win, let's say they won the mountain of government right now because they own the government. Do they kind of own the mountain of education if they get enough public schools to adopt vouchers and all that? Maybe. And that starts a domino effect, and that could go on for a while. But really what you're interested in is the fighting of the culture war. So to keep that going means also to agitate and to enrage, but you have to have you have to keep raising the stakes of that war, because this war has been on for several decades now. So each election cycle becomes not just good versus evil, but if you lose, then you go to an insurrection. So each cultural moment, each cultural divide, each social media phenomenon, each news story of one person who might be leftist or progressive flipping over a table becomes a national label upon the other side. You have to keep raising the stakes. And Turning Point was very good at that. So one, to me, that's dangerous. And then two, as I mentioned before, while they may use democratic levers of power to get people elected, they often then enforce their cultural code through anti-democratic means. I mean, we have Turning Point ambushing professors as they come out of class. We have Turning Point acting as a To Catch a Predator show, which I talk about in one of the chapters. They're not just talking; they're trying to enforce their cultural code on their own. And sometimes it's funny looking and sad and tragic, but other times it's highly successful. And so what you're doing, of course, is taking the minority position and making it in power, but you're also furthering the idea that violence is helpful. Now, Turning Point does not say that, and Charlie does not say that. They specifically have denied violence. But the more you ambush people and put people on a list that is a ready-made target, and the more you suggest that institutions should be cleansed, the more you're suggesting the only way to go is violence, even though you keep saying that's not what we're into, because you keep raising the stakes of the culture war. So it's dangerous to our democracy because of the minority-majority thing, but it's also dangerous to our country more broadly because it seems to want to win by keep fighting. And that only leads to not just more fighting, but to actual physical fighting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, so if we basically always have to have someone to fight, we're going to have to keep finding new ones and keep looking under floorboards for new enemies and ways to expose them. And I mean, I think you're being generous in saying that they didn't necessarily promote violence. I mean, we've seen and heard clips of Charlie saying, well, after Mr. Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, was violently attacked, that I mean, that guy was a patriot and he should be released from prison. And he's talking about how
Charlie
gun deaths are worth it.
Toes the line, like I'm just saying, or
in a very clever way.
Fail, right? Yeah.
He's like, oh no, I didn't say it, but he's right there, basically implying it.
Yeah, there's a great example in the book about an event they had in Idaho a couple of years ago, and a guy asked them, a conservative, obviously guy in Idaho, says, "When do we get to use the guns?" And Charlie's like, no. If you do this, is during the Biden administration. So if you do that now, they will crack down on you. Okay, great. And he says, no violence. But then take that question now and put it in a Trump administration. There's no question about the government cracking down on people who might use guns. They are the government now. So does that, if Charlie were alive, would that change his answer? Would he support the ways in which people are doing government-based violence in his name? That's a difficult question to answer.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't have to use our imaginations too much to see, what was a professor's watch list, 20 years ago becomes a target list for actuality, in the future, if we don't find a way to right the ship, or at least find a way to compromise and see the humanity back again in people. I was just kind of grieving that with my mom the other day. I was just like, what happened to humanity? Like, just humanizing people. And I've been pushing over and over, just image of God, Imago Dei, with anyone I have those interactions with, and teaching at church and discipling people. And like, they are never a monster. They are never an enemy. They are made in God's image. We have to see people like that, or it's easy to turn them into monsters, and monsters are easier to kill and dismiss and to put away.
Let me just say, I don't see Charlie Kirk as my enemy. Obviously, he's no longer with us, but I don't see Turning Point as an enemy. What I mean by exposing the dangerous plan is this is what they're saying they're doing, and I want to put it out there. But the answer to the Seven Mountains Mandate, the answer to Christian nationalism has to be democracy, has to be all the things you just which has a religious element to it. If their thing is a minority position, the only answer is a majority for the rest of us trying to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If we don't see a way to make our way back from seeing the other side as evil, not just wrong, but evil, It'd be great to get back to a point where I think they're wrong. That would be healthy for us. I think that senator's wrong or that side's wrong instead of they're evil. That would even be an improvement for us. So, man, there's so much more here. I could talk about this for 2 or 3 hours.
Everybody should read the book then. Yeah.
Yes, that's where we need to point you. So again, the name is The Seven Mountains Mandate by Dr. Matthew Boedy, and we will link to all that in the show notes, and any articles that you think would go well with it. We can include those. And I respect you and appreciate your work. This is sensitive and difficult stuff, but also very important. God bless America and every country on the planet. We definitely need him and want him. But while we are here, it is our job to redeem the times that are given to us in the best way possible. Dr. Boedy, would you feel comfortable saying a word of prayer or blessing for anyone listening?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sort of a benediction, if you will. As they say in my church, go out from these walls and show Christ to people. You're the only Bible people will be.
Let it be so. Amen. Thank you, sir.